Greetings, my brothers and sisters, sending gratitude to all of you who are joining in today to accompany us down the rabbit hole of self-exploration through plant medicines. My name is Ryan Sprague, and I'm here to tell you that your frequency is now set and tuned to explore psychedelic medicines and the impact they made among the countless psychonauts exploring the last true frontier. Buy a ticket and take the ride with me as we get true first-hand accounts of the experiences, benefits, risks, and transformations taking place within the ever-expanding world of psychedelic medicines on This One Time on Psychedelics. Today on the show, we have a very special guest who I have been beyond excited to dive in with since discovering his work. Since 2012, he has owned and operated one of the first legal psychedelic plant medicine therapy centers in the United States, the Medicinal Mindfulness Center, where he brings his clients through cannabis and ketamine-assisted therapies for trauma resolution. In addition, he also founded the Psychedelic Sitters School the same year, which is dedicated to training therapists in how to work with these medicines with their clients, and if all of that wasn't enough, he is also the author of one of my all-time favorite books, Psychedelic Cannabis. And in today's episode, we'll be diving into his journey, his thoughts on why cannabis is the low-hanging fruit for individuals looking to work with illegal plant medicine for trauma resolution, and much, much more. So please, help me in welcoming my man, Daniel Mcqueen, to the show. Dan, my man, pleasure to have you here, man. I'm super excited to dive in. You know, it's funny, I'll say real quick, I read your book long before I really knew who you were and what you did. And so it was really interesting because when I got into working with cannabis in the way that I do now, I didn't know of anyone else doing this. And so it was amazing to me when I found Stephen Gray. Of course, you know Stephen. Sure. When I found Hamilton, of course, you know Hamilton as well, Hamilton Souther. And then Psychedelic Cannabis, the book, Medicinal Mindfulness. You've done so many amazing things. And where I like to start these conversations is kind of seeing because this is a psychedelic podcast and you have a company that helps people be certified and understand how to speak the language of psychedelics in a very professional manner. How does someone like you get into this? Where did this journey start for you with psychedelics, and what ultimately led you to open Medicinal Mindfulness?
Yeah, gosh, that's such a big question. To not go all the way into it, right? But my first mushroom trip, I was 18. Really lovely experience, but also disruptive to my psyche as well, And I didn't have a lot of resources or any support. There was no such thing as psychedelic harm reduction or psychedelic education really at that time. But that was my entry into working with these medicines, and it was a beautiful experience. And then in my early 20s, I had the opportunity to work with some really wonderful underground communities that were very supportive, more spiritually oriented than anything, which now there's more of a clinical emphasis. But the more I worked with them, the more I realized that there needed to be a balance with the clinical, the psychological. And that just wasn't really acknowledged or addressed, for no negative reasons, just that was just their orientation. So I went to Naropa and got my master's in transpersonal counseling. And I thought I got involved with the MAPS MDMA study here in Boulder. I helped bring that to Boulder. And I wanted to do this work. But then I got married and we had young children. And then it became a bigger question of, well, how do we do this work in a way that, is legal and doesn't add unnecessary risk to my life? And so right before 2014, a friend of mine suggested we started working with cannabis. He knew my interest in working with psychedelics. I wanted to be a guide. I'd been doing some work around that for a while already. And I was like, I never really considered cannabis before. And he's like, it's a psychedelic, right? And I was like, yeah, I guess I did, but I never really considered it. I don't know, you've probably experienced this too, Ryan. Just people have a real block around cannabis. It's not rational. They have a real, a cognitive block. And I think it has to do with the war on drugs and cultural programming and stuff. So we started playing with cannabis as a psychedelic. I intuitively was drawn to mixing strains to make blends. And that just blew everybody out of the water. A friend of mine who was really sweet, she said, if I didn't know you well enough, I would swear you put DMT in that. And, and that was the light bulb going off. It's like, maybe there's something going on here we should explore. And I was surprised for years. Every time people had big experiences, I still get surprised in a way. But, so we started Medicinal Mindfulness as a harm reduction program through our counseling. And that eventually took over the whole thing, and it became its primary thing. We didn't have to hide it anymore. And so I started a program to teach people how to facilitate with cannabis. And then I went to a conference several years ago before COVID and really became aware of like ecological problems, and like it's just like front and center in my mind. And that's why I wrote my book, was to just get this information out there as soon as I could. And we've just been growing ever since. We have a team here of 8 facilitators, and on the training side, we have about 8 or 9 trainers, and we have an office suite. Like I'm in one of the offices here where we facilitate with cannabis and ketamine, and we have 4 offices and a huge group space and classroom space. It's just been really beautiful, fun, fulfilling, but sometimes extremely hard journey beyond,
Yeah,
So,
man, that's amazing. I
think the medicine took me more than anything, like I didn't plan any of this.
Yeah, 100%. I think that's like, for me, exactly what happened with me. I mean, a lot of my story is, recognizing the power of cannabis as a psychedelic from going to a cannabis institute that just so happened to open up in Boston, of all places, back in 2011.
Oh, yeah.
And that was really interesting for me because I had never heard cannabis referred to as a psychedelic. There was actually a time where I was in college. I was taking this course with this really cool teacher that I really enjoyed. And I remember one day, all the cannabis people kind of sat together, and so it was a community college. And I remember one day he was like, yeah, cannabis is a psychedelic, right? And all of us were like up in arms. We're like, no, it's not. Because at that point I had never done any other psychedelics. I thought I was in this completely different category. And I remember like going to bat over this, being like, no, it's not. No, it's not. And he was like, take a break for a month and then smoke it and then tell me what you think. And I was like, yeah, sure. I remember walking out as like an 18-year-old being like, what does that guy know? And then of course, years later, I'm like, that guy knew a lot,
I knew it. Yeah, that's awesome. Yeah.
So
we get that all the time, and people who sit up after the journeys, they'll say, I was open enough to try it, but I still didn't believe you, Daniel. And they sit up and like people who are really experienced psychedelic psychonauts, right? They'll sit up and say, that was the most profound psychedelic trip I've ever been on. And I've heard that so many times, so I'm really far past that point, of like, is it a psychedelic? But, it's a little different. So people don't get it, they don't equate it to the classic psychedelics. But it's a powerful healing tool. And it, the problem solving components of the medicine, like so practical, so helpful. I mean, it helped us build this whole program, so.
That's really cool, man. It's funny too, because cannabis does have such great practicality. And that's what I talk to a lot of people about. I'm like, listen, there's no diss against psilocybin or ayahuasca or any of these medicines. They've done amazing things for me and they've done amazing things for a lot of people. But a lot of people don't have the luxury of being able to like go take even a day off, let alone a week and an expensive trip down to Peru or Costa Rica or any of these places. And, very similar to what your book says, I very much believe the same thing where, ecologically we're heading towards a disaster point, and so like at the same time, I don't think psychedelics are for everyone. I do think that there needs to be a very quick shift in the collective as a whole. And I don't really know of too many other things other than psychedelics or a meteor hitting the earth that could do that. And I hope it's not the meteor option. I'd much rather it be the psychedelic option.
Yeah, that's and that cannabis, like as an option of psychedelics, is probably the most accessible of all the psychedelics and the safest. And like you said, our journeys are 2 or 3 hours long, depending on, the setup. Sometimes I'll do 3.5 hours, and that's plenty, so it's about half the length of a psilocybin journey. You can go to sleep afterwards just fine. You're not wired for 2 days or anything. And you don't like, it's not so doesn't blow out the ego like these other medicines do. So I think it's just a safer tool for ongoing support, And again, I value and love all of the medicines, but I think, I'm an advocate for putting cannabis in the pantheon, right? Like it has a special place as one of the deities of this psychedelic pantheon for sure. So I've gone a really deep appreciation for this medicine, for that. So, I'm hopeful too. And that's why I'm an advocate for psychedelics. We need to shift fast, but we got to create the infrastructure, right?
Yes.
Like, how do we create the infrastructure to have that mass awakening safely? Otherwise, it's just going to be wild, right? So,
yeah,
but that might be interesting too. I'm not opposed to that. Right?
Well, I mean, if you think back to like the 60s and 70s, I mean, people were taking like aggressively large doses of LSD and things like that. And I think the challenge with that whole like revolution was that there wasn't enough infrastructure. There wasn't enough, ability to actually tether back to reality, to stay grounded and to actually integrate these things. Because again, plant medicines can show you all of the what, but it's up to us to figure out the how, and I think that
bring it in.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that that's the main challenge that I've, definitely run into in my younger years with psychedelics, just going from journey to journey and having profound realizations, but not knowing how to contextualize them into my life. And that's why I love what you guys do so much. And, it's really an inspiration for what we do too, because, I'm all for, working with these medicines, but also we want to make sure that we create a positive image around them as well. Because, I think that in the cannabis world, at least, like, I worked in the industry for years and, grew up in cannabis and everything like that. And I watched all the wrong people get the licenses for these dispensaries. And, one could argue maybe they're not the wrong people. Maybe we get to see the end of the story. But, I really feel as though personally, I learned a lot from watching that. And I was like, okay, I don't want that to happen the same way with psychedelics. Like, yes, I like clinical setting. Yes, I like the medical part of it. But at the same time, I don't want just the pharma companies to have control of all this. Because I think at the end of the day, they lack some of the awareness of the connection to nature and some of the things that, maybe are a little more woo-woo to them, but really matter in the context of shamanism and these things and the ways in which these medicines have been practiced in indigenous cultures.
Yeah.
Hey, everybody. I hope you're enjoying the show. I wanted to take a quick moment to let you all know that the doors are officially open for the Conscious Cannabis Collective. And as such, this is the last week you can sign up and receive all of the bonuses we're currently including. This is the last time I will be personally onboarding those of you who sign up with a complimentary one-on-one session, and you'll have the ability to get the Grow with Cannabis course for free during this limited time. For more info on how you can take advantage of this offer, head down to the show notes for this episode and secure your spot today, as we only have so many spots left and they are filling up quickly. Now back to the show.
Yeah, for me, the ceremony and the woo-woo is a really essential part of these experiences. And our clients come to us because we honor the sacred and the spiritual nature of this work. But we're still grounded in science and still grounded in the clinical, educational stuff. But we also bring in, so I think about 4 primary paradigms, and I think of the aesthetics of it too. Like the beauty of the space, the beauty of the music, and a lot of that gets lost in these solely clinical or solely medical models. And then when you bring in corporate interest in like maximizing profit, to be honest, I've never seen a corporation or like that type of program work in this space. So I don't think they're going to be that viable, to be honest. Or it's going to be so controlled and so forced that it loses all the magic. But like a facilitator can only do 1 or 2 psilocybin journeys facilitated, a week, and and that's considered full time for most underground guides. And so like if there's a company coming in and say, okay, you're going to be working full time and you're going to do 5 sessions a week, that the burnout is going to be like, it's not going to be viable. So I'm hopeful that just the nature of the medicine will reduce some of that, but we're already seeing corporate interest come in, even in Colorado, and I've engaged other corporate interest, and the more I do that, more anti-corporate and the more anti-capitalistic I become, just like for practical reasons. But I also don't like the mindset. It's just not the right mindset for this work. So we'll see. We're doing the best we can. We're a small mom and pop shop. Me and my wife own our space. Most of our personal income comes from facilitating, just like the other facilitators. Like I just reinvest in the program, so I don't even know what a profit-oriented business even looks like,
Same. And I think that's really interesting, because I'm glad you brought that up, because in the space of cannabis specifically, like you look at these big dispensaries, especially in like Boston, even the corporate ones, right? Like, let alone the mom and pop ones, which barely exist here. Luckily up in Maine, we have a really good scene, but like you look at these companies and, someone might go, oh man, they must be killing it. It's like, no, they're actually not most of the time. Like most dispensaries are, in the red most of the time, and I think that with any of this kind of work, it needs to be something you really love, because it's definitely not easy. It's definitely not for the faint of heart. And it's definitely not the cash cow that I think people that are not inside this industry think it is and that it's going to be. I think that to me, like psychedelics, when I talk to people about them, they kind of get lumped in with crypto, like, oh, like, what should I buy? What should I invest in? I'm like, I have no fucking clue. Honestly, like, luckily I love this work. I've been doing it for the last 10 years. And, similar to you, was always obsessed with psychology, went to school for that. It just naturally morphed into this, So when people talk about it, I'm like, listen, you got to have love for it. And I'd love to have you expand on that for a second. Like, how important do you think it is, especially talking about corporate interests, right? And how it can get very bland when that energy comes in. How important do you think it is to have the people that run these businesses really be dedicated to the work they're doing? I mean, I imagine it'd be so important, right? But what would you say on that?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, like I'm thinking of it as almost a both and at this point, because like, so I'm not a business person, and there are things I've had to learn to create a vital business that were really hard that maybe a business person would have an easier time with. But if you just have the solely business model, there's no heart, or you put profit over the care of the client and the welfare of the facilitator, it's not going to last, So I'm trying to find that balance and work with business allies that have that identity as a medicine person. And then, the more of a medicine person you become, the more flexibility you need in your life, and, more self-care time and other things. So it's really hard to balance out. Like, I'm a business person and an entrepreneur and a medicine person. So I'm going, through this in like kind of a both but to do the work right, you have to have your heart in it. It's like, I would say it's the hardest job I've ever had, really. And, I've had some tough jobs in my life, and harder than being a psychotherapist. Like, we do 5-hour sessions, but when psilocybin comes online, we're going to be doing 8-10-hour sessions and stuff, so it requires a certain level of resiliency, psychological and energetic, spiritual, even physical stamina and resiliency there's nothing like it, because you're sitting with somebody who's going through the most extremes and most profound, most devastating, memories and the most beautiful experiences they've ever had. And to just bear witness to that over and over and over again creates a form of like, almost like spiritual fatigue,
Yeah.
But in another way, like, that stripping is positive. Like, I consider it a spiritual practice to do this work, So, I tell people it's the hardest job I've ever had, but it's by far the best job I've ever had. And the only thing that has kept me through it is like my just tenacity and bullheadedness and all the qualities that make me hard to work with, are the one thing that has kept me able to stay with it for so long. So people don't realize what it's, like journeying with your friends every now and again is just a very fundamentally different pace than doing this on a weekly, ongoing basis, and that's a step up that I don't think people yet get, because, we're one of the few places that gets to do this work on, like a regular basis. So why would they get it,
Absolutely.
So most of our facilitators are part-time, half-time, and they have psychotherapy practices and things. And that seems to be a good fit for a lot of us. I would do, if I didn't have to run the business, I would just do it every day, like that's where I'm at with this. And so I might be going back to that sooner than later.
I don't blame you, man. That is like the balance. I talk about it with Alex, my business partner, all the time. It's like, working in the business versus working on the business. And very similar to you, like, I'm not naturally a business person. I've had to thug it out and learn a lot of stuff really quickly.
Yeah.
And also, like, very similar to you, it is my bullheadedness that just like, and my perseverance that has kept me going, even in the most challenging of times. And, but at the same time, it's a slippery slope, right? Because sometimes that bullheadedness for me pushes me too hard. So then I start spending tomorrow's energy, and then again, when you're doing this type of work, you don't really have that energy to give from tomorrow because there might be a client that needs your full energy. And it's kind of like the analogy I use for this is it's like being someone who works at a kindergarten center with kids versus having your own kids, So it's like, that's what it's like journeying with your friends every once in a while versus actually leading someone through this. Like, it's like, yeah, you can go to kindergarten class and, watch kids and make sure they're safe and yada, yada. And then you get to go home and you get to like relax and, watch Netflix or whatever, but when you have your own kids, like, you might be waking up all night. There's like a dedication that is so much deeper, and that's how I look at like this type of work as well. So it's funny you brought that up.
Yeah. Yeah. Allison found this video on, what the number one qualifier for success was. And the theory was it was just grit, just the ability to keep doing it, even when it was really, really hard. It wasn't about just education or intelligence or skill sets or anything, just being able to stay with it. And then the shadow, you named the shadow that, Ryan, and I deal with it too. It's like, it's so exciting, so invigorating that you want to keep doing it. And then even if it's hard, you keep doing it. And then the burnout is extreme, so I quit drinking coffee several weeks ago, and I'm finally starting to normalize from that. And I'm making a commitment to do this work in a way that doesn't require me to drink caffeine. And that is like, just that little piece has been like world shifting for me. And so, so not relying on coping mechanisms when we're in it is, I think, for long-term sustainability is important,
Definitely.
So that's my hope, at least. So I hope I'm cognizant right now and speaking clearly. My
You're
brain has
great,
finally started
man.
to come back online after several weeks of, real fatigue from no caffeine. So, but it was too much. They're talking about using tomorrow's energy. That's what caffeine was doing. So it's like years of energy.
Yeah. I mean, it's interesting you mentioned that, because I recently, I was telling you before we hit record that last night I was talking to a channeler, and, it's like, I have my buttons I hit, of course, running a business called Highly Optimized. I probably had to find some buttons to make that name, so I have my buttons that I'll hit. I haven't been a coffee drinker in a long time. I'll drink like an espresso once a week with Rachel, my partner, when we go on like a walk or something on a Sunday. But I like cacao specifically because it doesn't give me that like crazy caffeine boost, which I haven't really been a regular caffeine drinker in probably 10 years. But kratom is definitely something that I'll interact with for podcasts or things like that. What my Achilles heel was nicotine. And it wasn't like smoking cigarettes. I quit that when I was 18, but it weaseled its way back in the form of like nootropics and nicotine gum and all of this kind of stuff. And before I knew it was just, going so fast. And I started to notice that my nervous system was staying upregulated to a point, because I don't interact with cannabis on weekdays specifically so I can feel the repercussions of these buttons I hit and make sure it's actually sustainable. And that one was definitely one that I've been off of it since the end of November, and it just weaseled its way in over the last year. And I was like, okay, because I've always been like, stay away from stimulants. If I interact with Tom a couple of times a week, that's sustainable. I just make sure I have extra, micronutrients and minerals. But when I was starting to do it every day with the nicotine gum, I was like, yeah, this is getting to be too much. So it's interesting you mentioned that.
Yeah, nicotine. I have a history with nicotine too. And my father smoked when I was a kid, so I think I was like naturally inclined to addiction towards nicotine. And it's been over a year now. And, you just got to be careful. It's as powerful. All of these caffeine, nicotine, alcohol, all of these are like really powerful tools. And they're so normalized, and overuse is so normalized. So, I quit. I had really wonderful experiences being a part of a Native American church community for a while. And nicotine was such a big, through the tobacco prayers was such a big part of it. I would relapse after every journey and start smoking again, and realize that, okay, nicotine in ceremony is not for me. And it's fine for other people, but for me, it's not something that I can do anymore. And after I made that commitment, it was a good shift for me, so no snuffs, no gums, anything like that. So the more I do medicine work, the less medicines I want to take into my body, if that makes sense.
Yes.
And then compared to cannabis, it's like, like if you like, I've been a regular smoker for a long time, and I've also recently been taking long breaks from it and stuff. Compared to cannabis is so easy to get off of compared to these tobacco and caffeine. Jeez.
100%.
It's just like, no, they talk about cannabis being addictive, and there's just no comparison in my experience.
100%. I agree. And it is funny because I smoked daily for over 10 years. And I wasn't like an all day smoker by any means. Again, this is actually what made it harder for me to realize I was interacting with cannabis unconsciously, because my brain and my ego had rationalized all the stories. No, it's only once per night. You're growing it yourself. You're vaporizing it. You're doing the blends. You're doing this. You're sitting in ceremony. And so, when I finally decided, okay, I'm not going to be an everyday smoker anymore, it was like, boom, quit, 3 months, no problem. Like, it was just like, wow, that was really easy versus
super easy compared to these other medicines. Yeah.
Oh,
yeah. Wild. I would think, where I think addiction in cannabis comes in is like high dose tincture or dabs and things like that. That's when things get a little wonky in the neurochemistry and in the brain and stuff. But most people aren't using it that way, and the way we use it, we just like, it's once or twice a week in ceremony. It's so healing, right? And you get so much information that's helpful that it's, by far a more positive than negative state. And also the medicine is so clean now, at least what I use and what we can get, so there's not pesticides and other carcinogens in it like there was when we were younger, so to speak. So it's just a wholly different plant.
Yeah. It's really interesting you say that, because that's like one of my whole, messages I tell people is I say, hey, you got to make sure you can find clean medicine, because the best way I can articulate it, in like a more spiritual type of way, is it takes some of the static out of the experience. I think that the energy of the grower who grew it really matters in the context of the entire experience, because if you're interacting with medicine that was grown by someone who was angry all the time, well, very similar to how if a dog was raised by someone who trained it to fight, that dog is going to try to fight everyone, even if that person is not necessarily a danger, right? And so I think it's very similar, same, but different, obviously, when it comes to growing cannabis. And that's why I'm such a big fan of, if people can, growing it themselves. Plus, it's super fun. Like, I don't know if you've ever grown your own cannabis, but it's amazing, man. It's so much fun.
Oh, yeah, and they're beautiful plants. So vibrant. They're really special plants. Yeah. I agree with that, like in having organic, I think, is vital now. And I would say still, even with the dispensaries, most people aren't getting the best medicine that they could, and that's one of the things I'm realizing to speak up more is like, don't just get any cannabis, right? And don't even just go to even the right dispensary, because there's dispensaries that are excellent, you got to find the excellent ones. And then that is a different medicine, And like I would say, it's like the static I would describe as like heavy, it's just like poorly grown medicine is just kind of heavy, kind of stoner, and that's like the stereotypical stuff. But if you're any of your audience have never experienced like really good, clean, vibrant medicine, I would recommend trying it out and then assessing whether or not you like this medicine or not, because most people don't smoke good medicine.
They don't. It's really wild, man. It's like a secret epidemic, because people are so attached onto the quantitative measures of cannabis, like what has a high delta 9 THC, or it looks pretty, right? When in reality, plant growth regulators, chemical salt nutrients, bloom boosters, all of that can make cannabis look the part, but really the energetic quality behind it is trash, And I think this is like the unseen, maybe not unseen. I mean, certain people see it like yourself, but it's so hard to convince people that like, hey, there's more beyond just the looks and the ratings of cannabis. Like for me, when I interact with something, when it comes to cannabis, I interact with it, I see how the experience is, and then I start going, okay, what's making up this experience? What is the cannabinoid ratings? What are the terpenes? What's the terpene profile, et cetera? I don't go for the terpene and cannabinoid first and then try it. I just go for the experience, see if that spirit actually like resonates with me, and if I resonate with it, and then I actually start going, okay, what's making this up? And then I can go into the science.
Yeah, I think that's great. Yeah, I learned, I learn a medicine by taking like one puff and just meditating with it and noticing where it lands in my body and breathing and what's activating my mind state. Like, is my heart opening and soft? There's a lot of really great things. Or do I just feel dull? And sometimes it's like, man, I really was hopeful for this strain and I just feel dull. It's like, I don't even, like I have cannabis, I don't even smoke because it's just not worth it.
Yeah.
So I've gotten real particular. I've also another thing I've noticed, Ryan, is that the cleaner the medicine, the less allergy-like experience I have.
Yes.
My nose doesn't get stopped up, or I don't feel like I need, I'm having an allergic response. So I don't think it's the medicine that's causing, the most of the negative effects. I think it's the pesticides and whatever else growing things that they're doing, 100%. Or they're not flushing it correctly or something. But I would say good, clean medicine's it's just a different spirit than it was 10 years ago when we started. So
absolutely. Yeah. I think it's really cool. And, it's funny because a lot of these more boutique strains that are being grown today, my buddy and I have a joke that everything is gelato these days. If you ask anyone, what's that? Oh, it's gelato 33. Oh, it's this, it's Dolato. It's this, and it's kind of funny, because he owns a hemp company. And so, I actually met him when I worked at the dispensary. So we would always joke about it because, we were both cannabis nerds, before it was legal. And so now we're just watching all this stuff happen. But, it was funny. Him and I were talking about it. There was an article released. And again, I haven't fact checked it, but it seemed pretty legit to me, which was that cannabis has actually lost a lot of its psychedelic properties since the modern hybridization movement, right? Where everyone has been going so hard for Delta-9 THC that it's been actually minimizing these other secondary metabolites and other cannabinoids that are actually a lot of times much more intoxicating than Delta-9 THC, like THCP, for instance. Have you heard anything about that happening? And have you interacted with some of these heirloom and landrace strains? And if so, what has been your experience with things like that as opposed to these super high Frankenweeds of today?
Yeah, I would say my experience with making a blend in the cannabis, making it psychedelic is it's got to be about 20+% THC.
Yeah.
And the most extreme ones are 33%. And it's nice to have some of those in the blends we make, but that's not all we do. And I would say the terpene profiles are the most important piece. And like you're saying, is it sometimes you find a strain that's grown by a particular person or it's grown outside and there's just something really special about it. Right. And who knows what the science is. But the other so CBD will reduce the effects of the psychedelic experience, but other cannabinoids do amplify it. And one of the big ones that I found to be most important besides the THC is CBN, cannabinoid oil. And there's something, it's sedative, so it helps relax the body. And I think one of the things it does is it allows you to then consume more THC without freaking out, right? Paranoid and anxious and all of that. But there's something psychedelic about CBN by itself. It makes the visual experience richer and a little more three-dimensional or something. And so that's the one I've been really loving and appreciating. CBG is coming. We're starting to see more and more plants with CBG in it, and that's been a nice heart-opening medicine that I've really appreciated. And then Delta-9 is something that I've been learning about more and stuff, but it's not something that we normally put in Delta-8.
Yeah.
That's not normally something we're putting in our strains, but we have students now in areas that are not legal yet, and they're only using hemp-based cannabinoids to make psychedelic blends. And I'm finding this is something I don't know a lot about, but because out of necessity to do it legally and to share the medicine, they're figuring out ways to make psychedelic blends with no Delta-9 whatsoever. Yeah. And I'm like, yeah, of course, this plant's truly tricky, and why not,
Yeah. So. It's funny you mentioned that, because I've gotten to try Delta-8 quite a few times because, of course, I want to hit buttons and see what happens, and I'll use myself as a test dummy. And, I found that Delta-8, because it's a minor cannabinoid, it was never really meant to be interacted with in the amounts that it's being interacted with now. I found that between 25 and 50 milligrams in an edible form, I actually really like. To me, it feels like Delta-9, but without a lot of the confusion / potentially psychedelicness that comes with it more. It almost feels more like CBN, where it's just that super sedating feeling, but it is a little bit more in your head than just CBN. But I found that with the hemp products, we have a lot of students that do connect with cannabis that are in places like Texas or, Georgia or places like that. And so we recommend purchasing hemp because what I found in working with a lot of hemp products is I'm like, there's a lot of the quote unquote experience with cannabis that is not Delta-9 THC as a result of interacting with these and realize that. And so I think that also hemp's come a long way. It's kind of like autoflowering genetics. When they first came out, everyone was like, oh, this is bullshit. Ruderalis is garbage, and now they've come a long way. Very similar with hemp. I found I order from this company in Maine called Rooted Heart Remedies. And sometimes on the weekdays, if I feel myself super upregulated, I'll take a little bit of their tincture. And it's all woman grown in the sun. They combine it with all these different, it's amazing. And I love it.
Yeah, that's wonderful.
Yeah. And I found this other company called Tweedle Farms out of Oregon that has a lot more variety than Rooted Heart Remedies. And so I tried some of their CBG flower, their CBDV flower, their CBD flower. I just tried a little bit of everything. And I love making the blends of that. It's fantastic. You still have complete wherewithal to have word retention and memory recall, but your body is down regulated. I love it.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, especially in stressful situations, or high stakes situations, taking these cannabinoids, not getting high, it's almost the opposite. It's just you become more lucid, more present, more in your body, and that allows for greater clarity of thought because of the the nervous system regulation. That's wonderful. Yeah, there's a whole, it's like a renaissance of this medicine is occurring right now. And in spite of the corporate interests and all of that, there's some beautiful people working with this plant.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You know what I'm hopeful of is that I think there's a spiritual movement going on right now. I think anyone that's in this world knows that's happening right now. And I think that a lot of these people are the people that are like, no, I want it grown by someone who actually had the right intention behind it. I want organic food. Like they're seeking out this specific quality. And I think that that's going to keep this part of the industry alive and well, very similar to, same but different to how craft beer has taken a hold, because essentially, right, I'm not an alcoholic drinker. I've never really liked alcohol, but I can see the whole idea is like, if you're going to drink, why not make it high quality things, especially because grains are one of the most heavily genetically modified and sprayed things with glyphosate, et cetera. So the fact that like Bud Light and, an IPA can exist and both do well shows me it's going to be very similar to cannabis. But I think that what's happening right now is people are unaware of what true craft cannabis is. A lot of people are like, oh, you mean cookies? Right. And I'm like, no, not the cookies brand, right? Like that's kind of like, a brand that to me anyway started off maybe in that craft area. And then they just, again, they grew, which is amazing. But I'm looking specifically for like, those older people or maybe even younger people that have Korean natural farming experience, biodynamic farming experience. They have a spiritual doctrine that they practice and those kind of things. Like I find something really special, and especially cannabis that was grown by women. When I first met my partner, she was growing and she was using deep water culture at first. And I told her about organics, and then her and I both just nerded out on organics. And so every time I would interact with her cannabis, it was just so there's no way to describe it and articulate it because it's beyond words, but it was just a very feminine feel. And cannabis being a feminine plant, I really do feel like women grown cannabis has a special place in my heart.
Yeah, no doubt. I think I agree, and needs to be more women growers. It's very dominated by men in this culture, and it is it's a female plant, right? And the spirit is, it's like the archetypal female, spirit, and in all the forms. And so I totally agree with you there. And it's a privilege for us men, and advocates for men, to be advocates and defenders of the medicine, and protectors of this spirit is kind of our role, and to speak to it as a spirit that we honor and respect instead of use and over cultivate and cover in poisons and things like that. So I think there's a real phenomenon occurring here, and on how we treat the female body, the earth itself through this plant. And so it is a philosophy of like an ecological philosophy when you really land in it,
Absolutely.
So I'm a huge fan. I agree with you. So, really invite women to explore this medicine. And the other thing, it's like more people than you realize smoke this medicine.
Yeah.
And so it's time to get people out and talking about that, and women sharing with other women that they are smoking, because not a lot of people are talking about their use because of this underlying inherent shame that's been imposed on us, So I'd like to just say maybe it's like, it's okay to smoke every day. There's reasons that people smoke every day, medicinal as well as psychological reasons. But the more skillful you use the medicine, the less is required to consume, and that it's okay to speak about it. That it's okay to share with your friends, and I tell my students all the time, it's okay to be excited about this medicine. Like some people are afraid to be even excited about the medicine because of, it's bad or whatever. It's just so ingrained, So just, like speak up, share your experiences. I've had the most beautiful experiences of my life on this plant, so.
Absolutely, man. I'm glad you brought that up because, I tell everyone all the time, I'm like, guys, I'm not the person who's meant to tell you what's right or wrong with cannabis, nor should anyone, right? So, I'll say like, hey, this is my personal frequency that I'm on at this point, but also, right, like applying masculine components like structure and discipline to cannabis, yeah, it can be useful, but also structure is great up until the point it becomes catastrophic. So what I tell all my students is like, listen, it's nice to set yourself a bar and make sure that you're like tuning in and making sure that you're connecting with the plant in a way that's not distracting or anything like that. But at the same time, right, like if I go out to Paul Check's house and it's a Thursday and he's hosting a workshop, am I going to be like, no, Paul, I'm not going to interact with cannabis with you because it's a Thursday? No, I'm going to fucking interact with cannabis, right? I'm going to have a blast because I know that like I can
thank you, spirit.
Yeah, exactly. Funny story, man. We were at his house for a shamanic sound healing workshop. And at the end of the entire workshop, this guy had brought this like huge sound bowl, like huge. And he had this whole story that went with it, that this guy that was a billionaire was just seeking out people's collections and looking in them. And he found this sound bowl that apparently had cured cancer, all this stuff, right? I was like, sick. So at the end of the event, it was like me and like 4 other people, and Czech was there. And so I went up to blow a bag with Czech. And when we're in there, we hear this, and it's just coming through the walls. And Czech's like, what is that? So we go down to his little garage, and it's my buddy John and a couple of my friends down there chasing Mimi. They're all singing the bowl. And Paul was like, hey, we should put some cannabis in the middle of that and sing it, and then put it in the volcano and smoke it, right? And I was like, let's do it. So it was just like times like that, right? Where, again, I really do believe that the difference with cannabis as opposed to other medicines is that other medicines can help you truly connect to yourself. I feel cannabis is the ultimate one, maybe besides MDMA, to connect you to others, and it's also a lot more kind of sustainable than MDMA, right? Like MDMA, beautiful, amazing, but you can't do that every week by any means, So
no, it's damaging to do that too much,
Yeah.
So, but we can create blends now, and I'm sure, Ryan, you've experienced cannabis that's just like completely indistinguishable from MDMA, especially when you get the right, when you get it just right. And that can be used weekly. It's neuroprotective, whereas MDMA is neurotoxic. And so I'm a huge advocate of these medicines, and have also benefited substantially from MDMA, but I've also seen the negative side of MDMA. So, really want to be an advocate for like MDMA once a year, once a quarter, make it really special. And then the cannabis is like the workhorse, it's safe to do. Like if you want to do ongoing journey work, cannabis, do it every week, and it's still safe. And it's, integrate, right? Integrate every time. But cannabis is the one that can be done in that way. It's very safe and relational, like you're describing, and aesthetically supportive. It really just amplifies the beauty of life without those negative effects, that the methamphetamine of MDMA can cause. So I'm glad you're bringing that up, because, like sometimes we have students that come in who are doing MDMA every month or something like that. And we're like, why don't you hit the pause button on the MDMA and shift to cannabis for a little bit, and I'll check in with them. It's like, tell me about your life and relationships. And oftentimes there's lots of disruptions around MDMA that's not with cannabis. So yeah, I'm glad you're speaking to that.
Yeah, it's important, because I think a lot of people, especially when they hear MDMA, right? Like, I think it's safe to say that both of us are like, singing its praise. It's amazing. But I think that also, like, we're very aware of the damage it can cause if not used properly, right? And again, that's just people's patterns with it and things like that. And, coming from the music festival scene, of course, like, people are interacting with MDMA in a interesting way. And I was very fortunate that because of anxiety, I didn't try any other plant medicine besides cannabis until I was 23. So that's where anxiety really came in to help me out. And by that time, I was already on my health journey. So when I got into it, I started doing a lot of research into like preloading and postloading, how often I should interact with it. Okay, once every 3 months, maximum. I when I go to festivals now, I'll educate people and be like, hey, I brought this, preloading and postloading. If anyone's doing MDMA tonight, please take some of this, protect your brain. Make sure you're not doing it, more than once at this festival, things like that. But, cannabis, like you were saying, it really is the workhorse, and it's the people's plant, right? I forget if that was you or Steven that said that first, but
medicine,
it really is the people's
Jeremy
plant.
Wolf spoke to that in the Pot book, the people's psychedelic. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, man. It's such a cool concept.
Safe. Yeah.
It's amazing.
Yeah, that's good. And I would say even the preloading and, taking nutritional supplements to support, even that after a while isn't that beneficial. It's just like there's only so much MDMA you can take in a lifetime.
Yeah.
And but with cannabis, you could, it's like take a break. We call it fasting, like we call it fasting. We don't say you have to quit or anything like that. We make it a spiritual part of the experience, and then you dose up as much as you can for the journey and go on a DMT level trip, and it's just so clean,
And you sleep like a baby after. Like, I'm really glad you brought that part up earlier, because even though I love psilocybin, I've had some hilarious experiences with LSD and some mind-blowing experiences. There's nothing worse than laying in bed like, all right, hour 3, still staring at the
I'm
ceiling.
ready to go to bed
like,
now, and my mind is still not stopping.
Yeah.
And as we get older, like, I'm definitely getting a little older, and that becomes more and more of an issue too, so like LSD, even psilocybin start very early in the morning. And even then, sometimes you can't sleep for a day or two. And that's hard on the body. That's really hard on the body.
100%.
Cannabis, if you're up in night school, we call it night school, right? It's still a really enjoyable experience. It's very blissful. It's not like the brain is churning and on the whole time. So, but then you could take another cannabinoid like CBN to help you sleep, right?
Yeah. I mean, cannabis is like, it's funny. I interviewed, I don't know if you're familiar with Dr. Michelle Sexton. She has the Woman's Green Guide, and she's like an endocannabinoid specialist. And she was actually saying that, awesome. Some of the research about cannabis impacting REM sleep is actually outdated, and they've done more research on that recently. At least she has, or some organization she's had. And it's really interesting because I had run my own little, just personal case study with this with the Aura Ring, and found that if I discontinue interacting with cannabis around 90 to 120 minutes before I go to bed, my REM sleep is preserved with regards to, on average, what I get for REM sleep. And so it's kind of funny where I joke that, out of all the medicines out there, cannabis is the one that you can interact with and actually wake up feeling better and having a better night's sleep than all the other medicines, where you usually have a little bit of sleep suffering, and
so you're saying 90 to an hour and a half, 2 hours before you sleep, if you stop smoking, you're good with your REM. That's something I noticed when I quit, was like my dreams were more lucid and stuff, but I never dialed it into that degree. So that's good to know. I'm going to give that a try, Ryan.
Yeah. It's cool.
Yeah, man. No, you feel better. Like, people feel better when they smoke. And for elders, right, too, what do you mean I don't have to have this pain all the time in my body? Or what do you mean it would be okay and I can be comfortable laying down? What a blessing, right? What a blessing. And not an opiate, right? It's not fucking you up in every which way whatsoever. So, again, from a harm reduction perspective or whatever, it's better for some people than to take it than not take it.
Yeah.
And you can't speak to, other medicines that way. And it's more like I don't know, what is it? What is this thing that we're taking? I don't know. What do we, it's not a vitamin, right? It's so
kind of
beneficial.
Like the way I see it is like a spiritual supplement of sorts, and
it's like a spiritual supplement.
Yeah. It's like supplement's the wrong term. It doesn't do it justice, but spiritual aid, spiritual ally, definitely for that. Almost like the way that I think about cannabis is kind of like an oracle or like a source of divination. It's like very similar to how if you pull from the I Ching, you read some message that usually is like, not jargon, but it's like a riddle. And then somehow your brain clicks in and goes, that means this. And you take your own meaning from it. That's kind of how I look at cannabis, right? We connect with it in ceremony. It gives us some flash of a color, memory, a number, something that all of a sudden gets, kind of like put into us. And we then make a meaning out of it, And I think that ultimately one of the things that cannabis has taught me is that I can access my own intuition. That's a real thing. I've now had the direct experience of it. And I think that's for a lot of people what is really fun about cannabis work, and what a lot of people in Connect with Cannabis talk about too, is that and I think this is actually, I don't know if it was in your book or Stephen Gray's book, but they were talking about how he's like, when I interact with cannabis, I don't need to see research that the heart chakra exists. I can just feel it,
Feel it. Yeah. It's a direct experience. It's obvious. Yeah. I don't have to read a paper on this. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Ryan. Yeah. I like the image of the oracle. I would say it's almost like a form of grace where the solution, you don't even have to work for it. You don't have to figure anything out. It just all of a sudden lands right in front of you, and you can see it, and you can see how obvious it is. And then you can go test it, after, the next day or whatever, you can go try it out, and it works. Yes. It's and then, it takes you a little further on your path. And then when you're ready to do another cannabis journey, and then there's just a moment of grace again, and you can test it, and it goes out, and it works. And that's really what's, and then, so on top of that, right. So the problem solving, and then the resiliency development, right? Like something about the medicine makes us able to do more, and have stronger capacity. So that combination is just astronomically beneficial. So,
Absolutely. It's so cool, man. We're going to have to do a part 2 in this because I want to get into cannabis and trauma work and a lot of other stuff I wrote down. And,
Sure.
where can people find you? Where can they learn more about medicinal mindfulness? Of course, we're going to put it all in the show notes, but I'd love to hear it from
Appreciate
your
that.
own mouth. If you have anything coming up to any upcoming classes, anything you want the people to know, tell them where they can find you.
Yeah. Medicinalmindfulness.org. It's our center here where we facilitate individual and group sessions with cannabis and ketamine. And then psychedelicsitters.org is my training program. And we have an events page on there. We do these monthly online in-person circles. So if you're like, okay, Daniel, I don't believe you, but I'm going to at least give it a try, right? You can come to one of our circles and take your own medicine in the privacy of your own home and join a journey with us. Those are really wonderful. So we have a really robust program. And then as a foundation, we're using cannabis and as a psychedelic to prepare for working with psilocybin and DMT now that those are legal in Colorado. So we're a full functioning psychedelic therapy center and training program and beautiful community around our work. And we love getting to know and meet new people.
So cool, man. Like I was saying in the beginning, like I read your book and then it was so funny because a friend of mine who grew up very close to me that we hung out for a long time and then just lost communication around COVID time. She ended up moving to Boulder and she saw me talking a lot about cannabis and she was like, hey, we should hop on a call. I was like, all right, cool. Let's catch up. And she was like, hey, have you ever heard of medicinal mindfulness? I was like, what? Like, she was like, have you ever read this book? And I'm like, of course I have, And so it was just so funny,
Awesome.
Such a synchronicity, man. And so, Dan, I got one last question for you, man. And that is this. Let's say someone listened to this conversation and they're really excited to explore psychedelics in their own life. What is the one piece of advice that Daniel Mcqueen would suggest to allow them to use proper discernment in choosing whether or not psychedelics are right for them at this time?
I'd say it's a combination of intuition and study. Learn as much as you can about the medicines, and then if it's accessible to you, speak to someone who's a guide and a facilitator. And they don't have to be there for your experiences and stuff, but to know you have some like safety and support around them, I think makes a world of difference. And then one of the things I've learned, Ryan, is we underestimate the power of our own breathing. And so if I were to say any one tool, if I were to just had the opportunity to share one tool with anybody, it is to learn to breathe in your belly, use your belly breathing to relax and regulate, and just trust your breath. And that's like 95% of it right there, but I would do a combo. I would study everything I can. And then also find good sources of the medicine, get it tested, know what you're taking. And then set up a really beautiful container for a life transforming experience. The more you put into it, the more sacred it becomes, and know the people you're with, so. I hope that answers your question.
That's amazing. That's amazing. It's so cool. I love asking that question because I get like so many different things. And, I think that what you said about the breath is so obvious. And I think that's one of the best things where like, if we think about cannabis or any psychedelic being like a training ground for life, right? Like very similar to cold plungers or combo, which isn't a traditional psychedelic, but you definitely have to stay with your breath on that thing, And so like, again, it's like, these things can train us to be more equipped to go through life's challenges with grace and ease, And I think that like, if we can start to or continue to be able to have our experiences inform our day-to-day lives, well, then our entire life can become a psychedelic experience. Not that the walls are melting, of course, right? That would be an interesting button, but like being able to like
they do,
depending on what kind of breath work we do in the morning too. I mean, you can definitely get some stuff happening.
No, I agree. Yeah, psychedelics as a tool especially in this time of our world cycle or whatever it is we're going through right now. The ability to stay present in extreme states when crises happen. Like our offices got flooded in a kind of this earth changes, global climate change event not long ago. And we were able to navigate through it and really make it into something really special as opposed to it being just utterly devastating to our program. And being able to use psychedelics was, I would say, the primary way we were able to do that. So I totally agree with you there.
Oh, man. I got to come out and visit you in Boulder, man. I got a lot of friends out there. You know, I got a friend who's just moving there. She's moving there pretty like a week, I think. And so I'll have to come out and see you. But Dan, thank you again so much, man. I'm ready for round 2 when you are. You let me know.
Yeah,
we'll plan the second one out and dive into cannabis and trauma work. Okay, guys. I hope you each enjoyed this episode as much as I did recording it. Daniel is an absolute master of his craft, and I have personally benefited so much from the incredible information he puts out and the work he does surrounding cannabis. For any of you that are looking to learn more about his work at Medicinal Mindfulness and or the Psychedelic Sitters School, scroll down to the show notes for this episode, where I will be linking all of the easiest ways to get in touch with him and his team today. Daniel, thank you so much once again for the incredible work you are doing in the world, for being a voice within the movement to re-establish cannabis as the powerful sacred plant ally it is, and for sharing your time, wisdom, and expertise with the listeners and me today. And until next time, my brother, may your journey be smooth and full of light. Aho.